Right. It's probably worthwhile starting out as we've hit the high noon, well, in the UK anyway. Um, Before we start, can somebody just put something in their message box if they can hear me okay? Just want to make sure everything's working, you can hear me. Otherwise, it's going to be a very long, boring hour. And if someone can just post, can you hear me okay? Um, yeah, I just wanted to confirm. I don't know, Noreen, if you can hear me okay. Ah, perfect. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Always this bizarre thing when you're doing these presentations. You can never tell anyone's hearing them. Anyway, let's get cracking anyway. So, perfect. So hopefully you can still see the screen, the layout, and there's a picture of me there in the right-hand corner, which was taken many years ago. My colour of the hair is slightly different. So before we dive into the details, I think we've got about an hour for this, give or take. Hopefully we should be able to get everything done within the hour. Quite a bit to cover, but if we keep at reasonable speed, we can cover everything. The other thing is around, obviously, if you do have any questions or points to raise, feel free to post them in the meeting chat. I only have one screen on this laptop, so I may have to bounce between two screens. So if I don't answer you straight away, it's not because I'm ignoring you, it's because I'm probably got a different slide up. Anyway, so a little bit about me before we dive into the detail. I have done a few of these for iExperts in the past, so hopefully a few of you may already we may have already met anyway. So my background is I've got primarily working in financial services technology, mainly in project management or change management as it's called these days, across about 35 years. Actually, it's near 37 years now. So I started working in 1988, which I suspect is before most of you were born. I do a lot of consultancy and program work, particularly, as I said, in financial services, post-trade compliance. I serve as a board member and strategic advisor to various firms across primarily the UK and America. And I've worked as an author, speaker, and a lecturer for the Open University in technology management, where obviously I do some sort of teaching around pen testing anyway. Anyway, so I've put this into sort of like six main parts to try and put some sort of like method around the madness. We'll go through what is pen testing. We'll look at the regulatory and standards landscape as sort of like setting the lane. And I've got item 3 there, which is the changes, the danger for the compliance. Really where the crux of the meat of the messages I'm trying to say is you can follow all the standards, you can have all the regulatory requirements in place, you follow all the ISO standards, etc., all best practice, but you can still have gaping holes in your pen test strategy. So this is where I want to say, yeah, regulations and standards are brilliant. If you don't follow them, you probably will get your wrist slapped or get in trouble. But if only just following them blindly doesn't mean you're protected, but more to that to come. Then 4, we sort of build on the dangers of being fully compliant and take a pragmatic approach to pen testing. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are quite theoretical. So I put a couple of case studies in section 5 where one firm's doing good pen testing, one firm's doing bad pen testing, and hopefully you can see that between them two. And the last area, which is a very small sort of wrap up and conclusions, hopefully to bring everything to a grinding halt. So if we look at what pen testing is, again, probably most of you already know this, but like most things in technology, there's multiple definitions of different things and obviously misuse sometimes. So if we just go through it, so basically what is penetration testing? It's a controlled and authorized security exercise to see whether you can penetrate your systems. And these systems don't have to be technology systems. Obviously that makes up the majority of it. It could be physical access to buildings, access to paper files as well. I mean, again, I've got some worked examples later on that what I've worked with large banks in the UK on some of the pen testing that the pen testers do. You try and simulate real world cyber attacks, both i.e. something like an attacker or a criminal or a bad actor, I think is the phrase they use these days, would try and do, as opposed to doing like a vulnerability test where you're just trying to do a skim over the top. Again, you try and identify weaknesses and gaps that could be penetrated before attackers actually do penetrate them. And as I said before, it focuses on systems. And obviously systems here is not always technology. It can include manual systems, physical buildings and what have you. But please bear with me, I'll get back to you on that. So what is the purpose of it? again, slightly covered some of this already. You want to understand how an actor or an attacker could gain access. Again, that's into technology and obviously physical systems as well. You also want to determine, even in the best will in the world, every system has gaps in it. You know, whether you have somebody you can access through a dodgy password or cross-site scripting, SQL injection attack, or somebody just walks through the security in the front doors, not challenged. So really, you want to make sure, even if they can get inside your system, how far can they move around? So if they can break through the front door of your house, all the other doors are locked, so all they can do is get stuck in the lobby. But it's a case of, yeah, all the other doors are wide open, so once you're in the front door, you can have a wander around and cause all sorts of mischief. And the other key thing, and this is one of the key points, and which is why I put it in bold and underlined and in text, you need to try and understand the real business impact. So ultimately, pen testing, like all testing to a certain extent, is a risk-based strategy. So you need to understand what are the risks to your business, and how could they be compromised by penetration testing. For example, you could have, if you're a bank, if I work in financial services primarily, you could have a site on the bank that you can look up people's balances, and you can do cash transfers. So clearly, if that is compromised, that's a big risk to the business, i.e. your clients can't continue to work. Because, you know, so you want to make sure that area is pen tested to death to make sure there's no gaps in it. But you might have another part of your website that's a list of directors, or a list of our history, which again is important. But if that gets compromised, it's not the end of the world. It's a bit of a pain and a bit of embarrassment. But yeah, you need to focus on the stuff that really impacts the business, as opposed to just doing everything. As I mentioned before, to validate whether existing controls work and gaps can be addressed. So as I said before, it's very much risk focused, basically on what are the areas that if they are lost, the impact could be bad. And also on that as well, you almost need to look at the other side on how an attacker can compromise it. There are a lot of, again, like all testing really, just testing generally, there's lots of automated tools that you can use to generate tests, which are very good. That's things like repeatable tests, and sort of like maybe some sort of like the volume test to try and see how things wobble under pressure. But there's also manual tests, you know, you also want to sort of check, you know, you can make them very focused on what you're doing. I don't know what I there. Again, I just stress this point again, it's the business risk. You need to understand which parts of your business are important. If you lose them, you cause a problem. So therefore, yeah, you need to check them. Yeah, and when you do the testing, you want stuff to come out of the testing to be able. We've got a problem with the firewall. Certain things can come through the firewall if they come this activity here, or we have an issue here. We don't have a lock on this door, or we don't have a TV camera here. So you really want to have stuff that, when you do the testing, you come up with real stuff that can fix the problems. You can actually do it. Real pragmatic things to do, as opposed to some sort of theoretical stuff that some sort of testing does. But penetration is not, just to be here. It's not a vulnerability scan where you basically just sort of skim across the outside of the system. Penetration testing, you want to get your fingers inside the system itself. It's not a compliance checkbox ticking exercise. Again, this is one of the crux parts of the presentation, is that you can be compliant with all the regulations, you follow all the best practice, so you say we're fully compliant, but doesn't mean that you haven't got gaps in there. So while the compliance rules and the regular rules and the best practices really do help, you have to think a bit more on that. But obviously we'll discuss that a bit later on. It's not random or unauthorized hacking. You do need to have some sort of control around it, because if somebody accidentally, a penetration tester, accidentally accesses somewhere, he or she could cause havoc. So you need some control around that. And it's not a guarantee against future breaches. You know, one thing I've been in the industry for 37 years, I said earlier, one thing I've noticed is that hackers, whether they're good hackers or bad hackers, always seem to be 6 months ahead of the rest of the world. So you think you put everything down, you tied everything down, and you suddenly find a hacker's found another way in. There's various types of pen testing here. Just run through them all here. I mean, it's network, which is internal and external. Pretty obvious. Can you access the network? Can you hack into it? Can you cause damage and make yourself mischievous? You can obviously get through web applications. I mean, years and years ago, there used to be lots of issues around cross-site scripting, SQL injection attacks. I mean, aware of some of the data leaks. I think it was in the UK, TalkTalk, a mobile phone, got all their customer data stolen because there was a SQL injection attack. A lot of big firms that pretended like banks again would have open APIs where you can integrate with them. The advantage of an open API, it basically allows anybody to have a go at it. So yeah, again, you need to double check all of those and make sure they're tested. Cloud and infrastructure, yeah, basically everybody uses the cloud in some way. I mean, Teams is the cloud, for example. All the firms I work with have some of their infrastructure on the cloud. Obviously, have internal infrastructure as well, so they need to be checked for penetration errors. Mobile applications, again, very, very open and suspect to testing. The other one is social engineering, and this is an interesting one because one of the examples I did many years ago, probably about 10, 12 years ago, I worked for a large UK bank, and they would deem UK critical infrastructure because there was payments, salary payments, invoice payments, that sort of stuff. So the UK government would actually pen test themselves the infrastructure. And one of the things they would actually do was, and it's a little bit naughty, but it was a good test. They'll actually send somebody into the building with a security card that's valid, but for example, the face doesn't match the person's on the card, so that person can just walk in. And things like that. They would also send in CVs and apply for jobs with people who didn't exist, who were dead or had a criminal record, or especially if the one of them had a criminal record for cybercrime, to try and check whether all the processes around that, the social or human side, is actually looked after. So it wasn't so much checking the physical technology, it was trying to check on the people around it, which was very interesting. And similar to the other one, similar to social engineering, the same place, the big, large UK retail bank. One of the things that we used to, one of the government pen testers, UK government pen testers used to do was try to get access to the building. Not smashing windows or climbing over fences, but like one of them that actually successfully got caught, so successfully didn't get catched. Somebody turned up and says, "I've come here to fix the leaking toilet." So the security guard on the front door told us where the toilet was. So this person obviously wasn't an engine, wasn't a plumber or anything like that. Decided to walk around the building and took loads of photos of, the entrance to the data center, took some photos of open safes and other confidential documents, and sent it back to the bank and said, one of our pen test persons, you let them straight through. They looked all the way around this. We've got the photos to prove it. They didn't do anything nasty with it, but a nasty actor could have got away with something nasty there. So this is, as I said before, it's not just technology. The pen testing is around the whole physical infrastructure. Why it matters. Again, probably covered all this already to a certain extent. It finds issues that automated scans will miss, again, because you're trying to be much more real and pragmatic. It focuses on business impact, which is the most important thing. There's no point putting lots of controls around a part of the business that's very low risk, non-material. You want to focus on the stuff that's really important. Like I said before, working for a bank, the online payment screen, critical. Lose that, the bank doesn't exist. Therefore, you want to make sure that it's tight as one can be. Help improve security posture. So like most things, organization, sort of like cyber security, penetration, access to the building is very much a cultural thing. In the same way you have a culture for sales or a culture for marketing. So therefore, you need to ensure that this creates a culture of security, and also it allows you to pass all the various regulations. I said regulations don't always help, but sometimes you have no choice. For example, if you want to run a credit card in the around the global, you need to follow the PCI DSS payment card industry data security standards. If you don't follow them, you forget it. You're out. You can't do it. And the same with SOC 2, which is an American, and the various ISO codes. So that's why it's important. So really, the final point to mention is, whoops, sorry, press the wrong button. The final point to mention there is it's a key function that must be done properly. Otherwise, it opens up the organisation for such risks as cyber attacks. Cyber attacks go wrong. Firms have to spend a lot of money to address them. It comes down to money. Where money does make the world go round. Likewise, you lose revenue. People don't think that you've got a banking system again. I use banking again. You're able to make payments, or client data or their transactions aren't going to be safe. they're going to take that money somewhere else. So as well as having costs in place to redeem a problem, you're actually going to lose revenue. Data loss, covered that already. Reputational loss, which in a strange way is one of the bigger ones. If people don't trust you, they're not going to do business with you. So it's the classic old thing. It takes years and years and years to get a good reputation. It takes one incident to lose that reputation. So a lot of firms these days are very much based on around reputation. I've just got a message. This screen is paused. Is it moving ahead now? Yeah. The next one, obviously, if you take that to an extreme, you could have bankruptcy as well. The other issue you have around there is a management distraction. So if you do have a Mavis, I worked at a firm many years ago who did have a cyber attack and they lost some client data. The whole management team was focused on trying to address that. So instead of trying to run the company, get more clients in, look after existing clients, they're all focused on this, which created a big issue. And there's many others. This list could go on forever. The other point to mention, which I've sort of touched on, but I thought I'd bring it here on the last slide here, is do not forget third parties. Virtually everybody uses, obviously you've got clients who are external, you've got customers as well as external, you have suppliers in there as well, and everything's all integrated these days. A lot of internal messaging, people use other clients, portals and what have you, share files, FTP, SFTP links and what have you. So the key point there is that you must make sure, as well as doing the pen test on your own stuff, you really need to ensure that your customer suppliers are also doing pen testing to a sufficient level that it doesn't compromise you. Okay, so that's where we are. So I hopefully that explains what pen testing is, and the purpose of it is very much around a business risk-based process. Find out what's important to your business, that if you lose it, it causes the issues, and therefore wrap around pen testing around it as tight as you can. There are, as I mentioned before, the regulatory landscape. It's worthwhile just skimming through some of these because the list is quite phenomenal, really. It's very confusing. So as I said before, obviously there's a large amount of regulatory demands and also a large amount of standards and best practice, which is good. Obviously, the proviso I mentioned before, following all of these doesn't mean you've got good pen testing and controls in place. But again, I'll explore that in more detail. So the regulatory landscape, you've got the PCI DSS, which is for credit card payments, which obviously we just mentioned earlier. You've got SOC 2, which is a wonderful bit of American law, which is systems and control, operational controls. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see how it impacts from a pen test point of view. This PCI DSS is very prescriptive. SOC 2 is not even explicitly mandated, which is I'm not sure I agree with. You've got HIPAA, which is the health system, I think. Health, I can't remember what it stands for. It's a health system. Pen test demonstrates proactive risk management, but doesn't actually say the details of what needs to be done. You've got NIST, which defines needs to be tested, and then you've got another standard there as well. So while all these regulations are good, and if you're in those industries, you need to be complied, following them and completing them doesn't mean you've got good controls in place necessarily. As I said before, PCI is very explicit and prescriptive. SOC 2 and HIPAA expects risk-based testing and not just checklists. NIST often provides a structure and methodology, but rather than a mandate, it's like it'd be good if you did it this way, but it doesn't matter if you don't do it. As I said before, none guarantee. They define the minimum expectations. So following these requirements, you need to go past the regulatory stuff. They don't get everything done. Looking at standards, again, a little bit of overlap here because some of these apply. You've got SOC 2, focuses on the maturity of the security program. You've got HIPAA again, protection of sensitive health data, NIST SP 853 and NIST SP 800-115. It sort of describes how penetration should be done. So there's lots of best practice. There's a lot of stuff out there in the world that you can follow. Standards landscape, again, a bit of repetition here. Expects risk-based testing, but do not mandate pen tests. Only requires the assessment requirements, and that's at a very generic level, so it's not unique to the organisation. And the other thing, it explains how to perform effective pen testing. And again, just to repeat the point I've done before, I've probably mentioned about 20 times already. These regulations and standards provide a steer, but do not guarantee compliance. So following, so by following these standards and implementing them doesn't mean you're fully compliant. And again, need to come to that a bit more. So what I'm saying here is the dangers of being fully compliant, and I use the word dangers in single quotes because what I'm trying to say here is, and again, this is the key point I want to mention, is you could be 100% follow all the regulations, follow all the best standards, all the best practice, but you could still have holes in your system that a pen tester or an attacker could drive a steamship through. So the first one is around, these things can become very much box ticking to say, well, we've done all the compliance, we're all ready, we're fine. But passing an audit does not guarantee protection. I mean, there's lots of financial crime activities out there who've got perfect audits, but when you actually go into the detail, there was criminal activity and all sorts of gaps there. It can provide a false sense of security, which is very, very dangerous. You think you're secure, and you're not. Much better to know you're not secure than think you're secure. And obviously PCI DSS requires annual penetration tests, but it doesn't actually say the scope of it, so it's very much focused in the specific area. All these efforts can be very time consuming. And I'm not going to lie to you, pen testing and data security is a challenge. And because you want to pass an audit or to ensure that your compliance regulatory, the teams could actually focus on meeting the audit requirements. So say we've done this one, we've done this one, we've done this one, this one needs to be done, this one we've done, and that one done also. But instead of actually mitigating the risk, so effectively focus on passing the audit as opposed to securing the environment. Scope limitations. The standards and the regs often define minimal expectations like PCI DSS, which is the credit card stuff, really just focused on credit card. Why wouldn't it be? Because that's what it's there for. But obviously, credit card payment could be much wider part of a much bigger part of the system. So which basically means critical systems, processes, attack vectors, which is a way to attack, physical locations, etc., could be outside of the mandated scope. Which is not good, again, because you think you're fully compliant, but you're not. And also regulatory coverage may not account for new emerging threats. So I think the point I mentioned earlier was, I said before, all the years I've been doing this, it seems like as soon as you think you've caught up with everything, the attackers and the bad actors always seem to be 6 months ahead. And so basically means, there could be other issues, there could be other vulnerabilities, there could be other social ways of trying to still penetrate, and the regulations aren't controlling it. So the regulations are always seem to be about a year or so out of date. The other thing is around this is always a tricky one, really, to be honest with you, because if you're over originally with the standards, you actually never do anything. The ultimate thing is to stop somebody penetrating your system. You just don't have a system, which sort of beats the point of it, or you tie it down so hard that no one else can actually grab into it. The next one is false sense of security. We've all covered that, really. Just because you've passed the regulations and you've followed all the business practices and you've got a full good audit, it doesn't mean you're compliant or fully protected. So there's still, if you're not fully protected, the vulnerabilities are still there. Human factors could be done there, or chained exploits, which is effectively, you're breaking one thing and then you can move around the system or what have you. And as I mentioned before, the standards evolve slowly, but adversaries evolve faster. Unfortunately, that's finesse, as long as I can remember. Repeated audits. I mean, I'm sure all of you guys and girls on the call have been audited, have done some sort of audit. You just seem to be filling out 1,001 spreadsheets, providing lots of documentation. But it's hard work, and to get it done, and they're worried about the organisations want to get the audit done or the approval for the regulations. They will actually focus on getting the audit done without actually ensuring that the real protection is in place. So might say, we've got the audit, we're all clear, but we've got loads of gaps over here. But because they're not on the audit, no one knows about it. And the other thing is around its regulatory penalties. So even if on the assumption you don't follow the standards or the regulations at a full space, you could get fines. For example, in the UK financial services, there's the Financial Conduct Authority, who's like the overseer in the UK on financial services. They've got strict rules around data access and just wider technology, not just pen testing and physical access and what have you. If you misunderstand the standards or deliberately don't follow them, you could get legal implications, or you could be ultimately criminally prosecuted. Financial, which is a very polite way of saying you're going to have a large fine, or worse than everything else, it appears on the front page of the BBC or CNN, Sky News, Star News, what have you, and effectively you end up a massive bad reputation, and that reputation, as I said before, takes years and years to build a good reputation. It takes one event to completely wipe it out. So as I said before, the regulations and standards are tools. They are good. I mean, I've given them a bit of a bad name, but they are very good. There's lots of good stuff in there, but they're not guarantees. Yeah. The danger lies doing the minimum to pass the audit to get the regulations by really ignoring what the real world's going to do. And then bear in mind, if you're a hacker or an attacker, whether you're a good hacker or a bad hacker, black or white hacker, I think it's a red hat hackers, I can't remember the phrase they use these days. If you know full well the audit's looking at this part of the world over here, you're going to try and attack this part of the world over here. So again, you need to sort of think quite well. Compliance can become a box ticking exercise. I think I covered that already. And I said before, true security requires a risk-based thinking and not just compliance. So therefore, I said before, you need to think about which parts of your business are critical. And if you lost that part of the business, whether it's completely or it's compromised or it becomes sort of infected or hacked in some way, what's the impact? So you need to focus on the key things. And the other factor is, I got this from a friend of mine who used to work in the UK police force in London. He says, if you want to catch a thief, you need to act like a thief or think like a thief, more precisely. Yeah, so you need to sort of step back. Once how would somebody trying to compromise getting into your building? What would they do? They're unlikely to try and smash through the window. They're probably reinforced. They're probably trying not to climb over the fence out of ours, but they might just try and just walk through and say, "Oh, I forgot my security pass. Can you let me in? Yeah, my name's Paul Taylor and I'm X, Y, and Z." Those are the things that tend to get done. Yeah, what they call in the UK looking at the soft underbelly. That's where people tend to try and focus on the easy bits to try and get through. Okay, so we sort of covered the dangers of being over being too compliant, if you know what I mean. Obviously, the point there is compliance is good, and you do need to follow the regs and the standards, but you need to think a lot wider because the audit doesn't cover everything. So again, a pragmatic approach, as I mentioned before, effective pen testing. And this is like a pragmatic approach. So the key thing there is you need to have you need to follow the regulatory guidance. To be honest with you, I know, for certain industries, financial services, particularly I work in at the moment, and I'm sure it's the same for health and pharma and all the others out there. Education, you need to follow the regs. I mean, whether you think the regulations are good or bad or very solid or just very patchy, if you don't follow them, you won't get, you may not be able to conduct business. So that is a key thing. But on top of that, again, the standards, I did mention, obviously, I was a little bit derogatory about some of the standards, but there's some good stuff in there, like most things. If you're trying to work out how to block some of the, tying down a data server or something like that, or try and turn down a web API, an open API, there's lots of good standards out there. Whatever you've done has already been done. But this is where it gets slightly different. I think what you need to do is, as well as taking the regs and the standards, I said before, you need to do an individual risk assessment of the organisation. You need to understand what's the key business functions, what's the risk if they get lost, and then if this risk is big or high or material, you need to make sure that it's pen test to death. And then, so all the attack, all the ways into it, all the ways out of it, so you can tie that down. The next thing to do is you need to understand attack paths. As I mentioned earlier, you may say, for example, you have access to an open API. You think that could be compromised and people could come in through the system through that API and cause all sorts of make sort of right mischief of themselves, right pig's breakfast of the world. You need to understand how are they going to get in, how do they connect? Is it MQ, SOAP and stuff like that? So therefore you need to understand them, and then you can sort of test all the different attack paths in to see if they break anything out. And the last thing to do is I have sort of like spoken about this sort of testing as very much as a one-off thing, but really you should be doing pen testing in the same way any auditor does any risk testing or anybody does any testing. You should have it continuous improvement. And in fact, that the example I gave on the bank earlier, I mentioned before, the guy came in with said he was coming to fix the toilets and decided to wander around and take loads of photos. That bank was under constant pen testing by the government, and the government every 6 months will actually tell them what they tried to do and how unsuccessful or successful they were. And 1 month they'll come back and say we didn't do anything. Last month said we came back and we managed to get in, we managed to send in a fraudulent CV that passed your screening test. Day 3, we managed to compromising, put a cross-site script into your onto a web page and so on. But it's a continuous thing. So basically, the idea is you do your pen test, you've got problems, we fix it, retest, problem. So it's a constant flow. But to be a little bit more specific, I've got 9 items. 9 items there, just to run through a sort of like a pragmatic approach to it. So again, the first thing before, like any initiative you do, testing, software development, anything you do really, go on a holiday, you need to work out what the success factors are. And it really, as I said before, it's around risk reduction, risk reduction, control validation. So basically, you've got the very risky areas, high profile parts of your business that can't be compromised, they're actually controlled. And then obviously to ensure you're regulatory compliant. As I said before, while the regulations do have gaps in them, the key point around there is that unless you comply with these regulations, certain businesses you can't operate in. And then you almost define what success looks like. And again, this is reasonably straightforward. You really want to understand what the real attack path for the key business functions are, how exposed are the key parts of your business. You need to sort of like look at the impacts of the findings. And then when you've done the testing, you need to say, well, basically, this worked well, we don't need to do anything. This didn't work so well, we need to put these controls in place, maybe tighten down security access, user access, and do that sort of stuff. And gov is short for governance, fit in the box, unfortunately. You need to establish ownership at a high level for this. Most ownerships you got is CISO, which is cyber information cyber security officer, which is often quite good. You might have other firms that have security leads. I've seen the chief operating officer, and in some places, some of the online firms I work with, the owner of all of this is the CEO, because if it goes wrong, it's critical. But they must be senior. You want a senior person in there who can literally, to use an American phrase, kick some butt, make something happen, and if problems are found, they can address them. Yeah, and before you go with the governance, you need to define like the rules of engagement, the authorization. Again, going back to the one about I used for the bank, the rules and authorization were given by the government because it's critical infrastructure. But the rules of engagement were that we won't hack anything. We will hack in, but we won't change anything. We'll send you screen prints or audit trails or logs of what we've done. So it's very much, we'll get in and then send a photo back of what we found almost. You might need legal and compliance approvals. For example, if you're going to play around during the day system, you want to make sure you've got legal protection in place. And you also want to work out what's the process of reporting and stuff. Because if you do find a massive hole for pen testing, say, for example, and you can actually get past the login screen by putting by changing the URL to certain settings. You would obviously want to make sure that's published around the company because everybody needs to know it. So obviously you need to have a tight little set of people who know so they can address it quite quickly. And the other thing is you want to try and run it, align it with all the standards. I think the ISO 27001 is a standard for managing data protection. So again, you just need to have control governance in place. So everything, you can document what the testers were for, what the findings were, how they were addressed. No more different than a sort of like a RAID log, but obviously focus very much on pen testing. Yeah, so as I said before, as you go through it, you need to work out what are the key functions by risk, i.e. if this function gets compromised and we lose this, then we're in big, big, big trouble. So those are the ones you should focus on first. Then you need to map the systems to these processes and data sensitivity. So for example, if you have as I said before, you're doing online payments and it's in the banking system, you might want to look at all the payment systems around it. You might want to look if there's any offshore sites or onshore sites or buildings that support that process. You want to make sure they're protected as well. So you might want to pen test people trying to get access earlier, and likewise the social engineering I mentioned earlier. So you want to attack, as I mentioned there, external attack surface, basically how they get in, how they can move around, and any internal threats as well. As I mentioned before, you want to make sure all your staff are fully agreed. And also, as I said before, the banking place I worked in before tried to their pen testers tried to bring staff in who were in prison or dead or didn't actually ever exist at all, things like that. And the other things around there is privilege escalation, which is quite a fancy term. Is once you get inside the outer rim into the system, how far can you wander around? Yeah, so if you can hack into a system, can you get to a Unix prompt? Or can you get to a DOS prompt or a Windows prompt? And that's showing my age. Yeah, and once you're there, can you move around? You know, can you actually sort of like move up to the root directory and move back down different trees and things like that? If you can access a building, can you? If you get through reception, does it mean once you get through reception, you're still stuck in the lobby because you haven't got your swipe card won't let you through, or can you just have a wander around and help yourself to whatever you want? So again, you need to check all that. You know, there's not a case of just getting in. Once you're in, you need to have a wander around. The third party in cloud exposure, as I mentioned earlier, is virtually every firm uses some sort of third party software development, remote help desk support, banks, web providers. And obviously some of that is actually general third party, some of it, the third party is hosted on the cloud. And this will cover your suppliers, customers, and market infrastructure, that sort of stuff. So you need to ensure that's pen tested as well. Yeah. So for example, when I couple of a consultant assignments ago, we did a piece of work with a major outsourcing firm, US based, but mainly in London and India. One of the things we will get from them was a written statement that they completed their pen testing and they weren't aware of any issues. And if there were any issues, they would list them and tell us what they're doing to fix it. So obviously we wouldn't be involved in their pen testing, they wouldn't let us, but we wanted to know that it had been done or not been done, as the case may be. And I said before, ensure the scope doesn't, that you don't go past the minimum compliance regulations. Don't do and cut and paste of it. The key point is identify your key business risks, which is the top slide there. Sorry, the top bullet there, to make sure you're covering what needs to be covered. Then the next thing is to look at your testing model. So, you know, what type of tests were you going to be doing? As I said before, do you want to test the networks? Do you want to test applications? Like cross-site scripting and stuff like that. Do you want to try and access the cloud directly? Do you want to access through mobile? Again, look at internal teams and external access. Excuse me, losing my voice. Red team, which is obviously like a hacker team coming in, where you want to get them to do it, you outsource to somebody else. You may need to outsource to somebody else depending on the state of your infrastructure, or do you do internal people? Personally, I would always employ somebody external because they can come in and look at things differently. Physical checks, as I said before, obviously people walking around the building and shouldn't be. Oops, sorry, press wrong button. And also the testing approach. And again, this is always an interesting one, actually. And obviously, you've got the three types there: grey, I think I spelled that wrong, white, and black box. So black box is tested functionality without the internal code and infrastructure, which is unlikely. If you've got a general hacker who knows something, they will probably know something about your infrastructure. If you're running on Unix, or you're running on Linux, or you're running on Windows and stuff like that, whoever you may understand who your firewalls are and your routers, all that rubbish, they would know that as well. So probably the black box is unlikely. I would probably say grey box is the most common, obviously, because there's so much information out there on the different systems, particularly if it's open source. All stuff around there that you can borrow. And white box testing, this is probably trying to test against someone an internal person who's not very reliable. So you might want to test that as well. Or the best way, you test all three. I mean, there's no harm in that. And as I said before, obviously, you make sure you can align your methodologies with some of the standards and everything before. Again, you want to make sure that if the standards are like this, like a small thing, you're doing something much bigger to cover everything. So when you do it, as I said before, you need to have rules of engagement, as I mentioned earlier. So we will do our pen testing over the next month, but we won't tell you when. We'll just tell you at the testing timelines after a month. We'll give you a report on what we've done, what we've found, what we think you're good at, and also have things like communication escalation paths. Because again, when I worked at another financial services firm, they hired a pen tester, and they found some pretty open areas where some sophisticated SQL injection attacks could actually steal data, and that was found on, say, on the Monday, and by lunchtime Monday that had been escalated to the client to say, we found this straight away, and you need to fix this now. We'll carry on doing our rest of our tests, but this is immediate. Testing, validate, testing authorization, system backups are in place in case you make a mistake and break something. And also to coordinate with IT, legal and business stakeholders. So you may do like a very focused pen test over a weekend. You want to make sure everybody's aware of it because there may be some bizarre behaviour on that as well. But again, it's like most of this testing, it's just stakeholder management, make sure everybody's in the loop. Next thing you need to do is sort of like execute it. So you have to simulate realistic attacker behaviour. So that will be things like if somebody's trying to hack into a banking system, they could either do it two ways. You could do it during the morning when everything is completely busy, and you can, might get your or your attack might get lost in the noise of everything else, or you could do it on a Sunday morning when half the support team are probably watching cricket or something like that. But you have to be realistic. This comes back to the point I said before. You need to think like a hacker. Always use automated tools because obviously it allows you to repeat certain tests. But sometimes if you want to sort of do tests where you're trying to work your attack path through everything, a manual test is quite good as well. So like any testing, like software testing or application testing, automated tools and manual testing is often work together well. So therefore, you need to focus on best way is exploitation. How do they get in? If there's a gap in there or there's a hole in that the pen tester can get their arm into, how do they exploit that? And attack chaining. This is a phrase which basically means you can do 3 or 4 or 5 different attacks at the same time. And the idea is all 3 of them go at the same time, and it could cause an exploitation type thing. So it's like you may want to try maybe put some gobbledygook data into an API to make it crash, but at the same time also doing a SQL injection tech somewhere over here, hopefully that you can try and get in both ways. Lateral movement, which is a problem, is basically when you get into the system, how far away can you move? So once you're in, can you run around and do sorts of things? And I said before, the key thing is obviously try and minimize the access to sensitive data and systems. I mean, as I said before, no system's completely blocked out. There will always be gaps. You want to make sure that you don't actually just focus on the key stuff. And document the proof. Again, as I said before, when I worked at pen testers, they'd turn up with a great big book in the old days of saying everything they did. We did this, we did this, we did this, and we noticed that there was a gap here. We then climbed through that gap, and then here we are. We managed to get to the root directory of your client server, and these are all the directories. Therefore, we have proven that we've actually got in, but we haven't played around with anything or changed anything, so it's quite safe. Review findings. This is where it gets quite tricky actually, because it obviously can be quite emotive. There's lots of gaps, and people end up pointing fingers at each other, saying it's the IT's fault. No, it's not. It's the auditor's fault. No, it's not. It's somebody else's fault. So you have to be sort of like quite careful there. So what you want to do is these technical, obviously a lot of this stuff will be quite technical, especially if it's on a pure technology system. Maybe social engineering and physical access won't be, but it will be some pretty heavy techie stuff that your normal chief executive officer may not understand. So therefore, what you want to try and do is convert these technical issues into business risks. And then for each of them, rank them on what's the likelihood of that area being compromised or exploited. So if it's a very high chance or a very low chance or a medium, along those side. And the other thing is that basically if that thing is exploited, what is the impact? So you might have, for example, say, this is, I've got a chart on this. Whoops, beg your pardon. So around the keyboard. So what you want to try and do is focus on really the stuff you want to focus on, the stuff that's very high risk businesses that have a very high likelihood of exploitation. So if you can imagine a graph, hopefully you can see maybe my hands on the screen, where if you're up in the top corner there with very high impact and very high likelihood of exploitation, you need to focus on them straight away. Again, it's no difference than a normal risk and assessment. I would also, and this is the controversial one, sort of like common vulnerability scoring system. I've had mixed views on this over the years. Sometimes you can make things a little bit too scientific, and people may even tailor the scoring to try and make things more priority or less priority. So I think some of this stuff has to be quite a subjective gut feel. Therefore, obviously, as part of the findings, you can identify and control weaknesses. Then once you've got all these assessments done and what have you, you need to provide a tailored report.
And normally I would tend to do one report, but split into two parts, or you can do two reports. So the first part of the report is very high level summary for leadership. So you need to ensure that the senior guys and girls in the organization are fully aware of the problem. So what would be something along the lines of, yeah, we've completed a pen test, the process took 6 months, and nice little table that says we've tested these 20 scenarios, 5 of them were no problem, 4 of them we found that we had some, let's say, lower risk impact issues that we need to address, but the remaining, there were a number of serious breaches that we found. These needs to be addressed immediately. And then you'll have a back-end sheet or a back-end document, probably quite long, what actual remediation needs to be done, what needs to be done. We need to tighten this server up. We need to make sure this system, this Windows servers, 3 versions of Windows behind. We need to upgrade our firewall protection. We need to update our staff checking system, stuff like that. So it's almost like the executive summary for leadership, high level, not good, okay. And the technical detail down the bottom is a big long list, basically like a project plan to a certain extent, what needs to be done. As I said before, you need to include the likelihood versus the impact, the attack narratives and the root causes, because if you fix the root cause, hopefully it fixes the problem. And as I said before, the pragmatic remediation steps, which I said before. And if you can also map these to the various standards that are out there, again, it implies, because obviously if I'm a manager there and I know that I've got let's say, for example, a breach or an exploitation in a part of my, I don't know, my customer onboarding screens, I want to understand, is this as an issue for us internally, or am I in breach of some regulations? If I'm in breach of regulations, I need to get that fixed straight away, otherwise I could get my collar felt quite quickly. And I've just done, this is what I was looking for, I put this on the wrong slide. So you've got very high likelihood up here, very high impact here. So anything that's sort of high likelihood and high impact, which is up here, these things need to be addressed quite quickly. And obviously, as you go down to the more low impact and less likely, all the way down here, they can be left for a different day. Okay, fix and retest. Obviously, you need to track remediation for a defined process. Yeah, it could be like a project management process. You've got 25 things to do. We've done 1. Next week, we've done 5. Next week, we've done 10 type thing. Assign owners and deadlines to them all. Again, obviously, if it's high impact, high likelihood, you probably want that done yesterday. And then owners, you might want to get somebody very senior, head of IT, head of security, head of premises, head of HR to track all that sort of stuff. And obviously, once you fixed them, you need to do sort of like retest them, make sure that you're actually still testing them. And with validations of fixes and stuff like that. So again, it's not no different to sort of like any other sort of software deployment or process change. You implement it, then you retest it, and then you check, have we fixed this? Obviously, one thing you could do, like any sort of like fix, you fix problem A, but actually that problem A was covering problem B and problem C. So you might get one problem out of when other problems appear. Hence the cyclical nature of doing this pen testing. Update risk registers and treatment plans. Obviously, you need to track it, log everything, because if the regulators come in and say, prove that you've done testing, or in my case, with the suppliers we used, prove that you've done pen testing, you need to give them some sort of proper documentation, as opposed to saying, it's all done, nothing to see here, move on type thing. Okay, and the other final point here is one of the things like this risk testing is very much based around like a one-off exercise, which is very misleading. So really, it should be a continuous improvement AU process. So you have to revisit reviews regularly, schedule tests ongoing. I mean, I've got it down here annually. You might want to do a pen test every 12 months, something like that. Maybe a certain period of time. You might want to do a full pen test if you've done any major changes. Like open a new building, done a software upgrade, rolled out some new processes and stuff like that. Or you can just base them on risk. Or I've even actually seen certain people would do surprise tests. In fact, the last place I worked, year before last, they actually did surprise penetration tests. Obviously had the pen. They employed an external company. They did the pen test without knowledge of anyone doing it, and then they came back with lots and lots of issues. Which in a strange way is quite good, because you know that a test is coming up, you can prepare yourself for it. If you don't know, it's what's likely to happen. And you can feed results into vulnerability managing, threat monitoring. And the other thing is obviously down here, it's right down the very bottom, is security awareness training. You need to ensure people need to understand these things are important. And obviously, as it's part of BAU, you can measure the maturity over time. And if it's part of BAU, you're doing these tests very frequently, or surprise tests, or after every so often, you know, it becomes normal BAU, and it creates the culture of security. So if we're going to do a few case studies here, actually, I'm conscious we're running a few minutes late, so I might have to bounce through these a little bit quicker than I hoped. So I've got a client there on the left, or is a good test company and a bad company. And so one's a software vendor, one's a full financial services firm. So the objective are, if you notice, the one on the left is very specific, network, apps, employee security awareness, etc. But the one on the right, which is a bad test client, is very vague and you know, identify security vulnerabilities before an external audit. It doesn't really say anything. And obviously on the scope there, you've got very much to get very specific external facing stuff, internal facing stuff, phishing, and then the bad pen test is a little bit more vague. It's only really internal and customer facing web pages. Again, planning on the good pen test is clear rules of engagement. You know, this is very specific, so you can actually measure what you're doing. You know what you're doing. You know what you're not doing, which is always a good thing, because you can always challenge it to say, we're not doing A, B, and C, but I think we should be doing it. And the last one is and if you look at the bad test, it's very vague. You know, it's like go and have nice weather, be kind. Doesn't mean anything to anyone. So you've got reconnaissance, which is like the pre-work. Obviously, good pen test is done detailed information gathered in OSINT, stands for open source intelligence. You know, they know you use an open source software. There's quite a lot of stuff out there, good stuff and bad stuff, on how to exploit vulnerabilities. And obviously, the bad pen test didn't do anything. You know, it's all like, we'll just do it on the fly. Testing approach, scanning, automated scanning, but had a human eye to check it, which is always very good. And obviously the bad test, you can see there was no manual identification. So I've done the test scans. There's no checking on whether the scans were correct or what have you. You can say on there, safely exploited a config system exploitory on the staging server, and the phishing simulation conducted responsibly. The bad test was tried to exploit the payment page. You can see where I'm coming from here. It caused the crash, but no coordination. So actually, the penetration test has probably caused more problems than it should have actually done without doing it. The reporting, as you can see on the left, was very specific. This is obviously good because the scope and objectives is very clear. So you can make it very sharp. But the bad pen test is full of jiggery pokery jargon, output, no guidance, no prioritization. So what I've done is, instead of converting the outputs into business speak and technical implementations, it's just basically done technical expectation, send it up to the seniors and say, look, if you don't understand it, go on a Unix course. Outcome, vulnerability, because obviously it's very clear, very actionable on the good pen test. Security awareness approved, overs posture and the culture is strengthened. Bad pen test actually created operational disruption. You know, so actually the testing caused a problem. Lots of effort to turn it around, and lack of trust. And also this stuff was external. There'll probably be reputational challenges and embarrassments in the market. So the key takeaways here is that planning, verification, safe implementation, actionable reporting are very specific, very controlled, very a lot of proactive thinking, very sharp. You know what you're doing. Where the bad test client, so a bad pen test column, not focused on risk, you know, no real planning, over reliance on rules. The testing was unsafe. So testing actually caused more problems than it's supposed to sort. And the reporting is poor. So basically, you tested bad, you've broken something, and the reporting, no one can understand it. So this obviously, while this is obviously slightly convoluted case study, but what it is trying to say is, pen testing, focus on the risks, focus on the attack paths, then do your testing, list everything that you found, and link it into likelihood and impact, and then you know what you can focus on. Okay, so we're almost there now. I can hear you cheering. So just to sort of run through where we are. So basically a complete wrap-up conclusion. Hopefully just take a few seconds. Without stating, obviously, pen test is critical to organisations. Therefore, it must be done correctly. Using the example of the case study on the previous slide, if it's not done properly, all sorts of chaos could happen. The key thing is look at the real risks of your business. Don't just focus on everything, because you probably won't cover it all, but focus on before. If we lose this page on our website, if we lose this building on this side, if this function is compromised, we're in trouble. High risk. Focus on the high risk stuff. Identify the vulnerabilities, because before the hackers do, because they always will do. So therefore, and map these vulnerabilities to the risks. So you want to make sure any vulnerabilities and all a high function are thoroughly pen tested to make sure they're correct. The other thing is, don't forget third parties. I mentioned it a few times. Your suppliers, customers, market infrastructure. In this connected world, everything's connected to everything else. So a failure or a pen test, a vulnerability on a customer site could impact you if you've got an automated interface. So therefore, these don't. No, everything's connected to everything else. I said before. Make security as part of BAU. As I said before, regular tests, part of BAU process. Don't treat it as a one-off thing. Sometimes you can do regular. I said before, you can do regular tests every 6 months or an annual. But if you've done a major technology upgrade or you've done a major new product launch, you might want to do a pen test on that as well. Again, just try and think ahead of the game all the time. Test real world attack scenarios. I said before, think like a thief. Don't try and think like an academic. So for example, I said before, that person compromised the building, actually managed to get in without a pass. He just went in and just walked through the door and said he lost his card. Can I have another card? They didn't actually check who he was. They just gave him the visitor's card and he wandered off. So that's something, if somebody's trying to compromise your building, they would do, along those lines, So basically think like a thief, as they say. Ensure compliance, which is good. Obviously, if you're in certain industries, you need regulatory compliance, but don't hide behind regulatory compliance standards, because I said before, they're often very narrow, they're very focused on their industry, and there will be all sorts of gaps in between them. So therefore, you need to, as I said before, back to the first bullet point, focus on the real business risk to your company. And I said before, slightly duplicate the point there. Bed into BAU, got duplicate bullets there. If you put it into BAU processes, you don't, it becomes part of the norm. Okay, so that's where we are actually. So thank you for listening. I think we're about 4 minutes to go. If anybody wants to discuss any of the points from this, my details are down there at the bottom. So you've got an email, my personal email address, sorry, my personal website and my LinkedIn stuff, which is obviously probably easier to get to. I've obviously written 7 or 8 books across various things, everything from setting up charities, project disasters, the parenting in the digital world, and all sorts of stuff there. So feel free, if you want to buy one of them, we'd be very grateful. But obviously, looking at the email down there, my Google Mail account is probably the best, the best area to copy me. Okay, I see a few messages. I'm about to say, please feel free to post anything up. I've actually just got some messages there, so I'll take them in the order I've got them. The first one is for those who maybe can't quite read. Unless you're going to. So, what metrics do you recommend to measure the effectiveness of a penetration testing program beyond the number of findings? It's a tricky one. I mean, obviously, the number of findings is a good basis point. I would actually say if you was to link, put maybe two tags against each of the findings. One is the impact of it. Is it high risk? Is it high impact? And low impact all the way down there, maybe sort of like a 5 high, 1 low, and have likelihood of 5 1, 5 low. And then what I've done in the past is how quickly we managed to remediate that finding. So what you really want to do is things like the higher risk side and the higher impact items, right, the stuff you need to fix. You really want to be able to have a metric that says these are all been resolved within a week, depending on the impact. Because what you really want to do with these findings and the stats around it, you want to focus on the stuff that's really important. You don't. Not everybody's got thousands of people can do it. John, not John, Jeff's in that. Actually, sorry, big one on that. What are the most common false senses of security organisations get after passing a penetration test? I personally still feel it's probably passing the audit, to be honest with you. When organisations pass an audit, they think, God for that, that's out of the way, we can move on to something else. So I think passing the audit is fine. I think also one of the things when I've ever done penetration testing with my, whether it's an external firm or internal, if I do a penetration test and I don't come back with major failings, my argument to them is you haven't done a good enough check. You haven't looked really, to be honest with you. So if you're doing, it's a bit like testing a complex bit of software or something along those lines. If you test a complex bit of software and you don't get any errors, then you think, have you really tested it? Are you just, have you just cut corners and stuff like that? So I think if the most common sense of security is having a clean audit, which is not bad, but sometimes it creates a sense of security. And the other thing is, if you're not finding lots of problems, then you do have to wonder how deep the penetration test is being done, how detailed it's being done along those lines. Because don't any organisation, don't matter how big you are, whether you're the biggest organisation in the world, as I think the UK National Health Service, all the way down to a small one-man band type thing, you're going to have gaping holes in your security. It's inevitable. Everything's too complicated. So really, if you're not finding lots and lots of issues in pen testing, I think that's a false sense of security because it proves that people aren't testing proper. Right, I hope that answers your question, John, I mentioned. Anybody else got anything? I'm conscious we're almost at time. I don't want to eat into your valuable days. No, I'll take that stunned silence. Okay, I suggest we bring that to a close there. So thank you for your time. Obviously, I've got my contact details down there. If you need anything, feel free to email me or send me a LinkedIn message or what have you. But otherwise, I hope you found this useful. Appreciate it was quite a heavy session, but this is quite a heavy subject. But obviously, thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll all speak soon. So thanks very much.